The recording light blinked red in the darkness of the archive chamber. Or sat in his chair, his 4 arms resting on his knees, his gray-scaled skin catching the dim light from above. Across from him sat a young journalist named, her tablet ready, her eyes wide with curiosity. She had waited 3 years for this interview. The old soldier had refused every request until now. "You want to know about the humans," Or said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "Everyone wants to know about the humans." Nodded. "The war ended 15 cycles ago, but the records are still classified. The public knows almost nothing about what happened on 7. They only know that we lost." Or made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Lost. Yes, that is one way to say it. Another way is to say that we woke something up, something that should have been left sleeping." He leaned back and closed his 2 upper eyes, keeping the lower pair fixed on the journalist. The people had ruled 17 star systems. Their ships were the fastest in the known galaxy. Their weapons could turn mountains to glass. When the High Council decided to expand into human territory, no one had questioned the decision. It was supposed to be simple. "I was young then," Or continued. "Strong and stupid like all young soldiers. My battalion received orders to take a colony world called 7. Intelligence told us the planet had fewer than 50,000 human settlers. We had 8,000 soldiers, air support, and orbital cannons. Command said we would secure the planet in 3 days." He paused and stared at nothing, lost in memory. "Our science division had studied the humans before the invasion. They sent us reports about the species. No natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no thick hide. They could not see in the dark. They could not smell danger. They lived short lives, barely 100 cycles at most. Their bodies were soft and broke easily. The report classified them as a level 2 threat, the same level as the grass eaters we use for food." Wrote quickly on her tablet, "But the report was wrong." "The report was not wrong," Or said sharply. "Everything in it was true. Humans are soft. They do break easily. They die from wounds that a child would survive. What the report failed to mention was that none of this mattered to them. They did not fight like creatures who knew they were fragile. They fought like they had forgotten it." The old soldier stood and walked to the window. Outside, the twin moons of Prime hung in the purple sky. Somewhere out there, past countless stars, the human worlds continued to grow. The thought made his scales itch. "We landed on 7 at dawn. I remember the sun rising over the forests. It was a beautiful world, green and blue, full of life. We expected resistance at the landing zone, but there was nothing. No soldiers, no weapons, no defenses, just empty fields and silent trees. Commander laughed and said the humans had fled. He said they knew better than to fight the Empire." Or turned back to face. "We sent scouts into the forest, 20 soldiers, the best trackers in our battalion. They were supposed to locate the human settlements and report back. That was at sunrise. By midday they had not returned. By evening we found their equipment scattered in the woods, their weapons, their armor, their communication devices, but no bodies." "What happened to them?" asked. "We never found out, not then. We searched for 2 days but found nothing except silence. The forest was wrong, too quiet. No birds singing, no animals moving. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. I told Commander something was not right. He called me a coward and ordered the advance to continue." Or sat down again, his joints creaking. Age had caught up with him. The war had taken his strength, and the years after had taken everything else. On the 3rd day we reached a river. On the other side sat a small human town. Maybe 200 buildings, mostly homes and farms. Our scans showed 42 humans with weapons defending the settlement. 42. We had over 300 soldiers remaining after the losses in the forest. Commander ordered an immediate attack. He wanted the town taken before nightfall so he could report victory to the fleet. The old soldier's voice dropped lower. "I crossed that river expecting an easy fight. I expected the humans to run when they saw our numbers. I expected surrender flags and pleading voices. I had conquered a dozen worlds before 7. I knew how species reacted when they were outmatched. They begged, they bargained, they fled. He shook his head slowly. The humans did none of these things. They waited in their positions behind walls of dirt and metal. Their faces showed no fear that I could see. Some of them were smiling like we were the ones walking into a trap. I did not understand it then. I thought they were too simple to realize they were going to die. Or extended one of his lower arms and pointed at a scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. I received this wound in the first 30 seconds of the battle. A human female, small and thin, came out of a hiding spot I had not seen. She fired a primitive weapon, a metal tube that threw small projectiles. The rounds punched through my armor like it was paper. I fell into the mud, bleeding, watching my squad advance without me. He pulled his arm back and folded all 4 across his chest. From the ground, I watched 300 soldiers attack 42 humans. I watched for 6 hours. When the sun set, I was still lying there. My wound had closed itself and I could move again. I stood up and looked at the town. We had taken it. The flag of the Empire flew over the main building. But of my 300 brothers and sisters, only 89 were still standing. Every single human was dead. 42 of them had killed over 200 of our best soldiers. Had stopped writing. Her face had gone pale. That was the moment I understood, or said quietly. We had not invaded a colony. We had invaded a nightmare, and the nightmare was just beginning to wake up. The recording light continued to blink red, capturing every word, preserving the horror for future generations who might forget why the Empire had learned to fear the stars where humans lived, waited in silence or gathered his thoughts. The old soldier had stopped speaking, his 4 eyes staring at the floor. When he finally raised his head, his expression had changed. The calm mask had cracked, and something darker showed beneath. "You want to know about the battle," he said. "The real battle, not the numbers I gave you. Numbers are easy. Numbers do not keep you awake at night. Numbers do not follow you into your dreams." He shifted in his chair and began again. "When we started our attack, I was at the front of the charge. I felt strong, proud. We were warriors of the greatest empire in the galaxy. These soft creatures would fall before us like grain before a blade. I fired my plasma rifle and watched a human soldier drop. Easy, simple, this would be over quickly. Or touched the scar on his arm again, almost without thinking. Then their leader stepped out from cover. A male human, average size, wearing dirty green clothing. I later learned his name was Jake. He held a weapon in his hands and stood in the open where anyone could shoot him. I thought he had lost his mind. I raised my rifle to kill him, but before I could fire, he shouted something to his soldiers. The old soldier paused. I did not understand his words then. I learned their language later, during the years I spent trying to understand what happened on that world. He shouted, "Hold the line, make them pay." His soldiers responded with a noise, a battle cry that still echoes in my memory. Then everything became chaos. Or stood and paced the small room, his heavy footsteps thudding against the metal floor. The humans did not fight from a distance. They waited until we were close enough to see their eyes, and then they attacked. Jake ran forward into our lines, firing his weapon without stopping. He killed 4 soldiers before someone shot him in the shoulder. The blast took off half his arm. He dropped his gun, picked up a metal blade, and kept fighting. He killed 2 more of my brothers with 1 arm before we finally brought him down. Made a small sound of disbelief. He kept fighting with 1 arm. He kept fighting until his heart stopped, or said flatly. And he was not special. They were all like that. Every single human in that town fought the same way. They did not know how to give up. They did not know how to be afraid. Or perhaps they knew fear better than anyone, and they simply refused to let it control them. He returned to his chair and sat heavily. There was a female soldier, Lisa. I remember her face even now, 15 cycles later. She was positioned behind a wall of metal containers, firing at our advancing troops. One of our snipers hit her in the leg. She fell and I thought she was finished, but she crawled back to her position and kept shooting. Another shot hit her in the side. She screamed in pain but did not stop. A third shot hit her chest. She should have died instantly. Humans are not supposed to survive wounds like that. Or's voice had grown quiet, almost a whisper. She did not survive, but she refused to die quickly. With 3 holes in her body, she continued firing her weapon. Her aim was poor and her hands were shaking, but she killed 3 more soldiers before her gun fell silent. When our troops finally reached her position, she was dead. Her finger was still on the trigger. Her eyes were still open, still staring at us with hate. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the recording equipment. Found herself struggling to write. Her hands were trembling. I have killed many beings across many worlds, Or continued. I have fought species with scales harder than steel. I have battled creatures with claws that could cut through armor. I have faced telepaths who could turn soldiers against each other with a thought. None of them frightened me the way Lisa frightened me, because she was weak. Her body was fragile. She had no natural weapons, and none of that mattered. She fought until fighting was no longer possible, and then she died still trying to fight more. He leaned forward, bringing his face closer too. Do you understand what I am telling you? They are a proud people. We are raised to believe we are the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Our children are taught that courage is the highest virtue. But what we call courage is nothing compared to what the humans have. We fight because we expect to win. We are brave because victory seems possible. The humans at that town knew they were going to die. They knew it from the moment we crossed the river. They had no hope of survival, no chance of victory, no possibility of rescue. And they fought anyway, not to win, just to make us suffer, just to prove that killing them would cost us more than we wanted to pay. Or sat back again, exhausted by his own memories. By the time the sun set, the battle was over. 42 humans dead, over 200 dead. We had won. The flag flew over the town, but standing there among the bodies, I did not feel like a victor. I felt like a survivor, and I knew deep in my heart that this was only the beginning. He gestured at the window, at the stars beyond. That night I walked through the human town. I looked at their homes, their belongings, the pictures they had hung on their walls. They had families, children, lives they had built on this world. They had known we were coming. They could have run. They could have hidden in the forests and waited for rescue. But they chose to stay. They chose to fight. They chose to die in their homes rather than let us take them without a cost. The old soldier closed his upper eyes again. I found a recording device in one of the houses. It contained a message from Jake to his wife and daughter on another colony. He had recorded it the night before our attack. He told them he loved them. He told them he was proud of them. He told them not to be sad because he was going to die doing what humans had always done, standing against the darkness, refusing to bow, refusing to break. He said his death would mean something because it would show the enemy what humans were made of. Or opened his eyes and looked directly at. I still have that recording. I have listened to it 1,000 times. I keep it to remind myself what we faced on 7. Not weapons, not technology, not tactics. We faced something far more dangerous. We faced a species that believed dying on your feet was better than living on your knees. And that belief, that absolute refusal to surrender, was something our empire had never encountered before. He took a deep breath and released it slowly. The real war started after that first battle. What came next was worse, much worse. But that day at the river, watching 42 humans hold back 300, that was when I first understood the truth. We had made a terrible mistake coming to their world, and every day that followed would prove just how terrible that mistake was. The recording light blinked on, patient and unchanging, capturing the weight of history from a soldier who had lived through it and never stopped regretting his part in its making. Noticed that Or's hands had started shaking. The old soldier gripped his knees tightly, trying to control the tremors. Whatever memories he was about to share were clearly worse than what came before. After the town fell, we built a forward operating base, Or said. Commander was dead, killed during the final push. A new officer took command, a younger male named Captain. He believed the hardest fighting was over. He thought the remaining humans would scatter and hide. He gave speeches about glorious victory and swift conquest. He was a fool. The old soldier released his grip on his knees and spread all 4 hands flat on his legs, steadying himself. The first night at the base was quiet, too quiet. We posted guards around the walls and went to sleep feeling safe. When morning came, 2 guards were missing. We searched the camp and found nothing. No blood, no signs of struggle, no clues at all. It was like they had simply stopped existing, or looked at with haunted eyes. The second night, 3 more soldiers vanished. The third night, 5. By the end of the first week, we had lost 27 soldiers without a single shot being fired. Captain doubled the guards and set up lights around the entire base. It made no difference. The humans came anyway. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, killing without sound, disappearing without trace. He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the memories pressing against his mind. We called them the Night Hunters. We did not know their real name until later. The humans called them Special Forces. Elite soldiers trained for exactly this kind of warfare. They did not fight in lines or hold positions. They struck from shadows, killed quickly, and vanished before anyone could respond. In my entire military career, I had never faced an enemy I could not see, could not find, could not understand. Leaned forward. The records mention a human commander. Cole, is he the one you encountered? Or flinched at the name. For a moment he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. Captain Cole. I met him on the 19th night of the occupation. I still do not know how he got inside our base. The walls were 3 meters high. The lights covered every approach. Motion sensors watched every shadow. Guards stood at every entrance. Yet somehow, a single human walked through all of it like none of it existed. The old soldier touched a spot on his chest, where another scar was hidden beneath his clothing. I was making rounds that night. I could not sleep. The disappearances had destroyed our morale. Soldiers who had laughed at humans before the invasion now jumped at every sound. They saw enemies in every dark corner. Some had started sleeping in groups, afraid to be alone. The fear was spreading like a disease. He paused, gathering the courage to continue. I turned a corner between 2 supply buildings and saw him. He was standing in the open, wearing black clothing that blended with the night. His face was painted dark. In his hands he carried a thin blade covered in blood. Behind him, on the ground, lay the bodies of 11 soldiers. 11 warriors of the Empire, killed without a single alarm being raised. Or's voice had dropped to barely a whisper. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. I raised my weapon to shoot, but he was faster. He moved like water flowing around my aim, closing the distance between us before I could pull the trigger. I am tall by standards, over 2 meters. I have 4 arms and years of combat training. This human was smaller, weaker, with only 2 arms and soft skin. In my arrogance, I thought I could defeat him easily. The old soldier laughed bitterly. The fight lasted less than a minute. He blocked my strikes, dodged my grabs, and hit me in places I did not know were weak. Every movement was perfect. Every attack was precise. He broke my primary right arm, then my secondary left. He swept my legs out from under me and put me on my back in the dirt. Before I could rise, his blade was at my throat. Had stopped breathing. She sat frozen, watching or relive his humiliation. I waited for death. I had failed, I deserved to die, but Cole did not kill me. He looked down at me with eyes that showed nothing, no hate, no anger, no joy, just cold focus. He said something in his language. At the time, I did not understand. Later, I learned the translation. He said, "Tell your people, we are coming." Or touched his chest again. Then he carved a message into my armor with his blade. 3 words in their language. I did not need to understand the words to know what they meant. It was a warning, a promise, a declaration of war from a species that refused to accept defeat. He stood and walked to the window, his back to. Cole walked out of our base the same way he had entered, through defenses that should have stopped an army. 20 minutes later, the explosives he had planted detonated. Half our supply stores were destroyed. The communications center was gone. 60 more soldiers died in the fires. The old soldier's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. I reported what had happened to Captain. He called me a liar and a coward. He said no human could have done what I described. He said I had imagined the whole thing. 3 days later, Captain was found dead in his own quarters. His throat had been cut. On his desk was a note written in script. It said, "We do not stop," or turn back to face. The humans had learned our language. They had studied our writing. They understood us better than we understood them, and they wanted us to know it. They wanted us to be afraid, because fear is a weapon, and humans knew how to use it better than any species I have ever encountered. He sat down again, suddenly looking old and tired. Over the next month, the night hunters killed over 300 soldiers at our base. They destroyed our vehicles, poisoned our water supplies, and burned our food stores. They left messages everywhere, on walls, on bodies, carved into the ground. Always the same words, "We do not stop," or met eyes with a broken gaze. The High Command finally understood what we were facing. They sent reinforcements, 50,000 soldiers, the largest ground force our empire had deployed in 200 cycles. They thought numbers would solve the problem. They thought overwhelming power would crush the human resistance. He shook his head slowly. They were wrong. The real nightmare was just beginning, and I was about to learn that everything I had seen so far was only a small taste of what humans were capable of when they decided to make a stand. The recording light continued its silent work, capturing the trembling voice of a soldier who had seen things no training could have prepared him for, things that had broken something inside him that would never fully heal. The archive chamber seemed colder now, had wrapped her arms around herself, though she was not sure if the chill came from the room or from the stories she was hearing, or sat motionless, his 4 eyes focused on something only he could see. 50,000 soldiers, he said quietly. The Empire sent 50,000 of its finest warriors to crush a human resistance that numbered barely 3,000. Our commanders believed it would be a slaughter. They were right, but they were wrong about who would be doing the slaughter. He shifted forward in his chair, his voice growing stronger as the memories took hold. The humans had retreated to a place called Marker's Ridge. It was a mountain stronghold on the northern continent, a natural fortress with stone walls and narrow approaches. The human commander there was a male named Colonel Danny Vance. Intelligence told us he had fewer than 3,000 soldiers under his command, many of them wounded, most of them exhausted. Our generals laughed when they heard the numbers. They said the siege would last 3 days at most. Or's face twisted, with something between pain and bitter amusement. The siege lasted 47 days. 47 days of fighting that I cannot describe without feeling sick. I was part of the assault force. I saw everything. I wish I had seen nothing. He stood and began packing again, unable to sit still. The first wave attacked at dawn on the first day. 5,000 soldiers charged the outer defenses. We had air support, artillery, and numerical advantage. The humans had walls of dirt, civilian weapons, and 3,000 tired defenders. We should have broken through in hours. The old soldier stopped by the window, pressing one hand against the cold glass. By sunset, 4,000 of our soldiers were dead or dying. The humans had turned every rock into a weapon. Every shadow held a sniper. Every path was filled with traps. They fought with a fury I had never witnessed. When one fell, another took their place. When they ran out of ammunition, they fought with knives. When they lost their knives, they fought with rocks and fists and teeth. He turned back to face, his expression haunted. On the 5th day, our commanders ordered a night assault. They thought the humans would be weak in the darkness. They did not know that humans had adapted to night fighting over thousands of years of war on their home world. The night assault became a disaster. Human soldiers appeared from hiding places we had not detected. They cut communication lines, destroyed supply wagons, and killed officers in their own command tents. By morning, we had lost another 2,000 soldiers. Or returned to his chair, moving like a much older creature. The days blurred together after that. Attack after attack, failure after failure. The humans never broke. They never wavered. I watched human soldiers charge our positions with nothing but metal blades because their guns had run empty. I watched wounded humans strap explosives to their bodies and throw themselves into groups of our soldiers. I watched their medics treating the injured while firing weapons with their free hands. His voice cracked slightly. There was a human female. I never learned her name. She was a medic, wearing a white band on her arm. During one of our assaults, she was captured along with several wounded humans. Our soldiers brought them to a holding area for questioning. The female medic asked for permission to treat her wounded patients. The officer in charge agreed, thinking she might cooperate in exchange. Or paused, swallowing hard. She treated every wound. She saved 3 lives with her skill and her calm hands. Then, when she was finished, she pulled a hidden blade from her medical kit and killed the officer. She freed the wounded soldiers and led them back toward the human lines. Our soldiers shot her 7 times before she fell. She died with a smile on her face, knowing her people were escaping behind her. The old soldier covered his upper eyes with his hands. On the 39th day, our communication teams intercepted a broadcast from Colonel Danny Vance. We expected a surrender request. We expected begging and bargaining. Instead, we heard something that froze the blood in every soldier who listened. He lowered his hands and looked at. Vance spoke calmly, like a man discussing the weather. He said reinforcements from Earth were 12 days away. He said his soldiers would hold the line until those reinforcements arrived. And he said something else, something that has never left my memory. He said, "We were born for this." Or shook his head slowly. "We're born for this." 4 words, such simple words, but they carried a truth that our commanders refused to accept. The humans were not fighting because they had to. They were fighting because it was part of who they were. War was in their blood, their history, their very souls. They had been fighting since the beginning of their species, and they had never stopped. While my people had grown comfortable with easy victories and weak enemies, the humans had been sharpening themselves against each other for thousands of years. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted. The reinforcements arrived on day 45, just as Vance had promised. Human warships appeared in orbit and began landing troops. Fresh soldiers, fresh weapons, fresh supplies. Within hours, they counterattacked. The assault was devastating. Our army, which had lost 31,000 soldiers trying to take the outer walls, collapsed under the pressure. Soldiers who had fought bravely for 40 days suddenly broke and ran. The fear that had been building finally overwhelmed them. Or's voice dropped to a whisper. I ran too. I am not ashamed to admit it. When I saw what the fresh human soldiers did to our lines, I understood that staying meant death. I fled into the forests with the survivors, a broken remnant of the greatest army our empire had ever assembled. Of 50,000 soldiers, fewer than 8,000 escaped Marker's Ridge. He sat in silence for a moment, then continued. That night, hiding in the forest, I listened to the human victory celebrations echoing across the valley. They were singing. After 47 days of horror, after losing nearly half their defenders, they were singing. And I realized something that changed my understanding of war forever. We had not been fighting an army. We had been fighting a force of nature, something primal and unstoppable, something that could not be defeated by numbers or weapons or strategy. Or met's eyes with a gaze that carried the weight of everything he had witnessed. Marker's Ridge broke our army, but more importantly, it broke our belief that we could win. The humans had shown us what they were capable of. They had shown us that they would rather die than surrender, and they had shown us that when pushed to the edge, they became something more than soldiers. They became something terrifying. The recording light blinked steadily, preserving the voice of a veteran who had seen the impossible and lived to tell about it, though living sometimes felt more like a punishment than a reward, looked at her tablet. The interview had lasted for hours, and her recording device showed nearly full storage. But she knew there was one more piece of the story that needed to be told. She looked up and asked the question that had brought her here in the first place. Why did we surrender? Our fleet was larger, our technology was better, we still had armies on a dozen worlds. Why did the Empire agree to peace? Or nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for this question all along. Because the High Council finally understood what they were fighting, he said. And understanding brought fear, fear brought wisdom, wisdom brought peace. He straightened in his chair, gathering himself for the final part of his story. After Marker's Ridge, the Council of Hierarchs demanded answers. They had sent 50,000 soldiers to take one world and had received back 8,000 broken survivors. They wanted to know how this had happened. They wanted to understand the enemy that had destroyed their greatest army. The old soldier spread his 4 hands in a gesture of helplessness. Intelligence officers spent weeks studying every piece of data from the war. They analyzed the battles, the tactics, the weapons, the behavior of human soldiers. They interviewed survivors like me, recording our stories, cataloging our experiences. And when they had finished, they presented their findings to the council. I was there. I was asked to attend as a witness. He paused, remembering that day. The lead intelligence officer was a female named Analyst. She stood before the council and delivered her report with a voice that trembled. She said that the humans were unlike any species the Empire had ever encountered, not because of their bodies or their weapons, but because of their minds. Their psychology was fundamentally different from ours. Or leaned forward, his voice intense. She explained that most species in the galaxy fight for rational reasons: territory, resources, survival. When the cost of fighting exceeds the potential gain, they surrender or retreat. This is logical, this is sensible. This is how intelligent beings are supposed to behave. But humans do not follow this pattern. Humans fight for things that cannot be measured: honor, pride, revenge, principle. They will sacrifice everything, including their lives, for concepts that have no material value. He tapped his chest with one finger. Analyst showed the council a graph. On one axis was the probability of victory. On the other axis was the willingness to fight. For most species, willingness decreases as the chance of victory decreases. The line slopes downward, simple and logical, but for humans the line does something strange. It stays flat. Sometimes it even rises. The worse their odds become, the harder they fight, as if difficulty itself motivates them, as if impossible odds are an invitation rather than a warning. Shook her head in disbelief. That makes no sense. It makes perfect sense when you understand human history, or replied. Analysts showed the council records from the human past, thousands of years of warfare, conflict, and struggle. Humans had spent their entire existence fighting each other. They had developed war into an art form. They had created cultures that celebrated warriors who stood against impossible odds. Their histories were filled with stories of small groups defeating vast armies through sheer refusal to give up. He counted on his fingers. A handful of humans holding a mountain pass against thousands. A single city resisting an empire for years. Soldiers freezing and starving but refusing to retreat. Over and over the same pattern. Humans were not bred for peace. They were forged in war. And that forging had created something the galaxy had never seen before. Or stood and walked to the center of the room. But the most frightening part of the report was not about the past. It was about the future. Analysts told the council what human governments were doing while we debated our next move. They were not discussing surrender. They were not begging for peace. They were arguing about who would get to lead the of space. He let that sink in. They had lost a colony world. They had lost thousands of soldiers, and their response was to plan an attack on our home systems, not out of desperation, out of anger, out of wounded pride, out of a desire to make us pay for every drop of human blood that had been spilled. Our intelligence estimated that within 2 years, human fleets would be attacking our outer territories. Within 5 years, they could threaten Prime itself. The old soldier returned to his seat, moving slowly. The council debated for 3 days. Hawks argued for continued war, for throwing everything we had at the human worlds before they could strike first. Doves argued for immediate peace, for abandoning our conquests and hopping the humans would be satisfied. In the end, wisdom prevailed. The Empire sued for peace. We returned the territories we had taken. We paid reparations for the damage we had caused. We signed treaties promising never to enter human space again. Asked softly, and the humans accepted. They accepted, or confirmed. But not because they wanted peace, because they knew they had won. They had shown the entire galaxy what happened when you attacked humanity. They had turned our invasion into a warning that would echo across the stars for generations. No one would make the mistake of underestimating humans again. He fell silent for a long moment, then spoke again. You asked me at the beginning of this interview if I hated the humans for what they did to my people. I told you no. I told you I respected them. Let me explain what I mean by that. Or's voice became solemn, almost reverent. The humans taught me something about courage that I had never understood. I always thought courage meant being strong enough to fight your enemies. The humans showed me that true courage is being weak and fighting anyway. It is knowing you will lose and refusing to surrender. It is dying on your feet rather than living on your knees. They were fragile creatures in a hostile universe, and instead of hiding from that truth, they embraced it. They made their weakness into a weapon. He looked at with eyes that held the weight of 15 years of reflection. I respect them because they earned my respect through blood and sacrifice. They did not ask for peace. They demanded it through the strength of their will, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure my people remember what we learned on 7. Asked her final question, what lesson should the galaxy take from the human war? Or smiled grimly. There are species you conquer. There are species you negotiate with, and there are species you leave alone because the cost of fighting them is higher than any possible gain. The humans belong to the 3rd category. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the oldest or the most advanced, but they are the most dangerous because they simply do not know how to quit. He leaned back in his chair, finished at last. My advice to any civilization thinking about challenging humanity is simple. Do not. Leave them alone. Trade with them, talk with them, learn from them if you can. But never, ever give them a reason to point their weapons at your worlds. Because once they do, they will not stop until one side or the other is completely destroyed. And based on everything I saw during the war, I would not bet on them being the ones who break first. The recording light blinked one final time and went dark, saved the file and closed her tablet. In the silence that followed, she looked at and saw an old soldier carrying scars both visible and invisible, a veteran who had learned the hardest lesson the galaxy could teach. Some species were not meant to be conquered, and humanity, for all its weakness, was the most unconquerable of them all. The interview was over. But the warning it contained would echo through history for centuries to come, a reminder of the day their empire learned to fear the soft creatures from a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star.